17 back in Brisbane. I'm here joined by Tye Adams from Trumbull Unmanned. So welcome, Tye. Thanks for joining us.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
All from the US, right?
Yeah,
so let's just kick it off. So what is Trumbull Unmanned and what do you guys do?
All right, well, Trumbull Unmanned, it's a data analysis and collection company. So we primarily specialize in drones. And we work with clients on integrating data collection and analysis into their current operations, and that kind of happens along two lines, whether we actually come in and advise clients on which drones they should use and how they can actually implement it and collect the data, and work with them to get the internal capability set up, or we'll come out and actually collect the data, analyze it, hand it to them, and give them a finished product.
So it's and part of the conversations we've had before is actually can be quite a tricky terrain in terms of that communications channel between where you need to be and where your remote operations are.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, as of right now, the vast preponderance of drones are done via line of sight, just a direct communication link between the controller who's physically watching the drone most of the time, and the drone itself. That isn't necessarily a requirement. I mean, the technology exists to not do it that way, but under the commercial aspects, that's the way it's currently done, really. And then, so anytime you got a direct line of sight communication link between someone on the ground collecting the data and wherever you're trying to remotely collect, terrain obviously becomes a big issue with whether you can actually maintain that line of sight. I mean, and that's the part of the value proposition of a drone, right, is reaching areas that are tough to get to by man. And then, so in that aspect, getting a drone somewhere that's remote inherently involves getting outside of line of sight oftentimes.
And I suppose we'll talk about a little bit later in terms of some of those challenges, but coming back to, it's interesting how we met, right? So Trumbull Unmanned came out here as part of HotDesQ. So probably, I'm not sure whether too many of I'm not sure whether we call them viewers or the people out there on the YouTube actually understand what HotDesQ is. Can you give us a couple minutes on that?
Yeah, so HotDesQ and Advanced Queensland, it's a Queensland state government grant here in Queensland, and it's basically designed around bringing new startup innovative companies, relocating them either from other states or from international, as in our case, to Queensland, and then bringing them, their operations, their technology here, starting up and basically starting up shop here and running it. And the idea is to create an ecosystem where these young entrepreneurs are here, and it all builds on itself, and it's more or less an economic play than anything else.
So for you guys, what does Australia mean to you in terms of your operations and where you want to go?
Well, Australia is really similar to the U.S. in a lot of space. I mean, culturally, we're nearly identically aligned. And then a lot of the same challenges and infrastructure exist in both places. So it's nearly identical as far as applicability for drones and what we do here is in Australia. And then the HotDesQ program and the funding and coming over here, it was like a no-brainer. Like if we had the ability to scale that, it was an easy choice, and because I was more than willing to come over, we had the ability to scale.
It's not bad lifestyle here.
No, not by any means.
And it would have been a few weeks ago, we had the World of Drones conference as well. So your organization was part of that. So what'd you do there?
So the World of Drones, there was, I think, 2 or 3 days, a couple days being big panel discussions, bringing people from all over the world to discuss different regulations and uses, and it's more of a educational and industrial insight, bringing all the leading experts to talk about the different various aspects, whether it's environmental remediation or data collection, data security, regulations. It was just kind of a world showcase of everyone that's got a stakeholder in the drone business, and they all just kind of came and collaborated.
I have to say, it's fantastic from Dr. Catherine Ball actually helping out and being quite a major driver in actually getting that conference set up.
No, absolutely, and Catherine knows the CEO of our company, Diane Gibbons, quite well, and that's how that plug-in for us coming over was. It was definitely through Catherine.
So in terms of actually some of those terrains and some of those challenges that we sort of talked about between the US and Australia, one of the things that we did talk about is probably more the telecommunications infrastructure, but also some of the regulations differences.
Yeah, I mean, talking about the regulations, there are certainly differences. Largely, I mean, there's not too much that is different as far as like what you can and can't do.
Okay.
One of the big things with Australia is that it is, I think it's further leaning forward. It's easier to do some of the more risky or the harder to accomplish operations, like beyond line of sight operations.
Yep.
It's easier, whether that's a population density factor or it's just a no kidding further leaning forward regulation type of environment. But it's easier to do that here than in the US. It's very, very stringent. It's part of that is the different government bodies, where the CASA here or the FAA back in the States, them trying to figure out how they want to actually regulate this as this industry grows. And a lot of it's been kind of put on check as they're like compiling all this data and figuring out how they're going to regulate it. And in the meantime, like beyond line of sight is a very tough thing to do. You have to do a one-off waiver in a very specific use case to get it done in the States.
Yeah.
And then, and I'm talking just based on what I've read and heard. I haven't actually done anything beyond line of sight here.
Yeah.
But from what I've gathered, that's the case.
And if you go back, let's say 10 years, when people were, in terms of flying things and helicopters and planes, it was very much that commercial, that really recreational view. But now drones actually bring that into a totally different spectrum.
Yeah, well, I mean, drones have been around for a long time, right? Like hobby drones, people have put together little model aircraft and flown them, but it really hasn't been prevalent. And you haven't largely been able to go to a store and buy one that's fairly reliable, fairly cheaply, and like without any much skill, frankly, take it and be able to put it up into like the incoming flight path of a 747. Yeah. Right. So it's definitely the industry, and the need for regulation has definitely evolved. But drones have also been around for a long time. I mean, my background in the military, like we've been using drones for years and years and years in highly technologically advanced ways. That just now the price point, the economic and commercial ability to make it really economical is coming down into the actual commercial industry rather than the defense.
So we're moving into a market where we're not necessarily dealing with specialists that understand the rules and regulations. We're actually moving into an area where someone like myself that don't necessarily know all the rules are actually flying some drones in places that we shouldn't be.
Yeah, I mean that certainly happens. That certainly happens. There's lots of different new innovative ways that are being implemented in like combating that. There's different, I mean, all the flight controllers basically these days are all automated, right? Like you're not actually flying the drone, controlling rudders and propeller speeds, right? You're just telling it to go from point A to point B. And in that fashion, there's technology available that'll assist people in keeping within regulations without them necessarily having to know the exact to the T dot regulations, which if implemented correctly is very helpful. But then there's also the other aspect that we talked about with nefarious actors, like doing it on purpose, whether I mean, you can take that down a long road, but there's people that don't know they're not complying with the law, and then there's people that know they're not complying with the law and doing it intentionally. With the things on drones as well, the kinds of capabilities and the devices that you can put on these, starting to be, I just saw from the World of Drones conference so many things on Twitter in terms of what people are doing in different applications and use cases. Even putting the resuscitation type gear and then putting the pads so someone out in the middle of nowhere can actually get a defibrillator onto them, bang. There's so many different applications that we can look at now. Yeah, I mean, it's funny. I mean, the drone itself, right, all it is a transport vehicle, right? Exactly. And then it primarily, as of right now, is used as a platform to collect data, right? And like there's a host of different devices and technology out there that collect data. They just not necessarily haven't been paired with a drone, but we've seen, especially in the last like 5 years, like that technology, that pairing is really taken off. Different types of cameras, different kinds of sensors, and then the drone's ability to actually, like, just like you said, carry a defibrillator or transport, you name it, to a location that's remote and that would take significantly longer without it.
Yeah. So the last time we caught up at the Capitol upstairs in the great great outdoor area upstairs where the barbecue is, we talked about that you guys were helping out around the Houston floods. So
the Harvey.
Yeah,
the Hurricane Harvey had just hit Houston, and flooding levels were astronomical. I mean, it's crazy the amount of water that got poured into that city. But so I mean, the emergency response type capability that defibrillator, call it a defibrillator, call it a life jacket, I mean, you name it. But we were there in Houston working frantically, trying to assist where we could with the various different emergency response personnel. And it's really interesting in that, like, there isn't a standing pairing at that point, at this point, right? Like the government, city council, I mean, you name it, whatever level, down at especially the state level, they don't already have like a drone operator on standby that could hey, we need to go search this block of houses to see if people are stranded, or like, hey, let's take a drone over and take a look at the levee that's about to bust and see if, like how close to the water is to the top of it. I would suspect that's going to happen in the very near future, but it was pretty ad hoc dealing with it there in Harvey and trying to get a hold of the right people to see where you could help.
Well, it was fantastic to see Trumbull Unmanned actually involved in those kind of efforts, and it is, in reality, it's part of that social contribution. There is something that we can all gain from that, so it's fantastic that you guys were actually involved and helping out where you can, especially where some of the time, part of that conversation, you were doing some of that stuff from even here.
Yeah. I mean, obviously I wasn't doing too many of the data collection efforts, but a lot of the legwork and the coordination that goes into it, like I was telling you, the ad hoc nature of trying to get a hold of the appropriate emergency response personnel, that I could double tap that from here and leave those guys back there worried about getting the equipment into the right place and being able to actually collect the data.
So you're talking about floods, different terrain. So you also do things out open water?
Yeah, we've done some offshore stuff, which presents its own kind of unique challenges. We've flown off of some different oil rig platforms and different naval vessels, which makes the satellite connectivity and electromagnetic spectrum issues a little challenging, but nothing that you can't really overcome if you know the technical aspects of it.
So one of the things we talked about there is that there is not just one way of communicating. There's not one way of doing surveillance, and just choosing the right tool for the right job.
Well, yeah. I mean, there's definitely not one solution fits all, right? I mean, like as of right now, the drone you're going by over there in the Queen Street Mall, right? Like that thing connects to satellites, GPS signals, and that's how it primarily flies. I mean, it's got some IMU sensors and some other stuff on it, but the vast preponderance of it, it's all GPS kind of guided. And you start dealing in different environments where that's not necessarily the case. If you understand the technology and you can understand how it all kind of links together and works, you can supplement that link, that information node that the data is required by the drone in other ways.
Yeah. So how important is the communications back with the drone, or is it offline? What happens when those things sort of break down?
Well, it kind of goes back to what I was talking about earlier, right? Like it's like the drone operator these days isn't actually like controlling rudder speed and propeller speed and pitch and stuff like that. Like they're more or less telling the drone where to go from point A to point B.
Yeah.
And in doing that, the drone's got to know where point A is and got to know where point B is, right? So if you're in an environment where it can't discern that information through a number of different ways, you have to figure out how you can make it discern where it's at, or go straight back to manual, which frankly, it's a lot tougher to do it that way. It's easier to tackle the technological challenge rather than trying to do everything freehand. It'd be like trying to oh, do I make a copy of this, or do I, write it all out? Like it's just the accuracy and reliability of what you're doing is not going to be quite there.
So the logic, the software, and also, like a better term, some of the autonomous decisions to actually when you out of range or when you don't have those things, that's part of that?
Oh, certainly. Yeah, and I mean, it's certainly an enabler, right? Like all the binary talk and the computer vision, I mean, you just start throwing out, like all these different sensors and capabilities and data analysis are certainly an enabler into making sure you can safely fly.
Yeah. So we'll actually have Dr. Monique Mann coming up a little bit later on, where she's talking about law, surveillance, and privacy type things from a lawyer's perspective. So it'd be interesting in turn. One of the conversations that we'll bring up there is the whole autonomous vehicle type notions and what happens, not just from the technology side, but what happens if things go wrong. So that'll be an interesting part of that conversation.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I might stick around for that.
Well, thanks, Tye. Thanks for your time this morning, and I appreciate you coming down for TADHack Global. Enjoy your stay for the next, how long are you here for?
At least another 4 months.
Yeah.
And then, depending on if I can convince them to give me another visa, maybe permanently, who knows?
Yeah, so appreciate you coming down and spending some time with us on the QT Foundry couch today on Saturday.
Thanks for having me.
Cheers.
Appreciate it.
Okay, bye.
Bye.
Up and thunder.